So for the first time in like 91, 101, 40 years, the Republicans have a massive like 10-point lead in generic congressional ballots for the upcoming election. That's a massive, massive lead. What does it mean and why? It's Rob Nelson Live. Hey, I'm Rob Nelson. I used to host a show on Fox, and now I do a digital live stream called Rob Nelson Live. And my whole mission is to figure out how in this time of division we can find common ground.
Speech, and they're not allowed to do that anymore.
I understand what it's up.
They be focused on rebuilding California.
Oh, it's so true. Come on. This is where this gets real. He says you're heading. I wouldn't want to be black and driving in a car. Right. Point there, right? Some of what's in this music, you can't sanitize it. All right, guys, welcome to the show. We're coming at you from. I'm in Puerto Rico. Crafty's in Los Angeles, and you are wherever you are. Let's jump right in. So, interesting week and a half. Lots to talk about. I set up the tease with the fact that Republicans have a 10-point lead in generic polls, and I'm going to kind of come back to that. But I just as a headline, 51% to 41%. It's the biggest lead in the polls history, going back to 81. Generic congressional ballots don't, they're not definitive. It's generic, meaning there's no name on the poll. It's just vote Republican or Democrat. But that's a bad sign when you're getting a 10%, when you're down 10%, registered voters saying we'll vote Republican generically over Democrat. We're going to talk about why and what that means and why that's happening and why it's significant that it's so big. I've said for a long time, Republicans are going to sweep the midterm elections next year. I think there's a lot of reasons, and I think a lot of them come back to accountability, transparency, broken promises, and expectation that things would be different with President Biden. I said from the start, that's a stupid expectation. They'd be different, all right. Everything can be different than Donald Trump, but the expectation on the part of voters, they're very dissatisfied. We'll dive into the polls. We'll dive into the numbers. I want to start with something else that sort of came out in the headlines in the news yesterday, and I think it plays into this. The Pentagon announced that they would not be seeking any additional accountability measures for the failed drone strike in Afghanistan a couple months ago. Now, if you remember, because it's only a few months ago, a history. Remember when we were still in Afghanistan, the ugly, messy, chaotic withdrawal, and there was a terrorist attack on Hamid Karzai International Airport, and the U.S. government was, immediately like, we're gonna make people pay for this. We're gonna get, bring them to justice. And a few days later, they did a drone strike, claiming that there was credible military intelligence that there was going to be another attack on the airport. So they launched drones. And right afterward, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, said it was a righteous strike, he called it. Boom, we got the bad guys. They attacked the airport and they killed U.S. personnel, and Afghanistan people too. But, the U.S. government's like, oh, whatever about them. But, we're getting even. We're stopping them. We're making them pay big time. Except they accidentally killed an entire family of people. I don't mean sidebar casualty along the way. A bunch of innocent people got killed. I mean, that's all they killed. Oh, it's not because they missed. No, they didn't miss the bad guys and accidentally hit the good guys. There were no bad guys. They just targeted a car and a family in their driveway that they said was a terrorist. Well, it turned out, after a few weeks of investigation, which the U.S. military just said we can't investigate. We don't have the ability on the ground to investigate. We're already gone. But, thanks to the New York Times and the Washington Post, who I still think at times do real journalism, the Post more than the New York Times, but there's individuals who do. And when they're outside of the narrative of needing to make a case, against Donald Trump and for President Biden and the left and the right and that whole thing, they went and did their own homework. They didn't have troops on the ground, but they managed to figure out how to trace it through forensic evidence and cameras and surveillance and piece the whole thing together. And lo and behold, Well, they've been tracking a car with a driver who was never close to being a terrorist. In fact, he was just a decent guy, Zuwai Ahmadi. In fact, he actually worked for a U.S.-based aid organization, the Nutrition and Education International. Think of that. And they killed him, and they killed 9 of his family members, including like 7 kids. Just blew them to shreds in the driveway. Oh, sorry, wrong people. They would have covered it up to the end of time if the Times and the Post hadn't done the forensic research, which the U.S. military said they couldn't do, and track down who they killed. And I said this when I talked about this a number at the time a couple months ago. The U.S. military knew who they killed 5 minutes after they did it. Apprehensive Fly, you're going to have to wait on that comment because I'm in the midstream here, my friend. But I will. I'm a big splash of libertarian. I'll answer that before the end of the show. Teaser. Hang on. And so bottom line, this made me so indignant because it's like you in a rush to make a public perception that you were like tough guys, getting the bad guys, killed an entire innocent family, then lied about it, called it righteous. Again, if you think for a second the U.S. military didn't know they made a mistake for 3 weeks till the New York Times and the Post pieced it together, then you really, really are living in a fantasy world. I'm in a bigger fantasy world than Donald Trump's big lie, because there is no way they didn't know what they were doing right after they did it. I've heard from pretty credible sources that actually someone on the ground notified them minutes before the strike that they were going to strike the wrong target. And they went ahead with the strike, not because they just wanted to do it, probably because they weren't sure, what they're like, we're already too far in, whatever, and didn't do it. And then that same person notified them immediately afterward that you definitely just hit a civilian target. There were no terrorists involved. There were no terrorists in the car you've been tracking. There were no terrorists who got hit. There were no terrorists near who you were hitting. You literally targeted a civilian and his family, and because you thought he had a bomb in the back when it was a bucket of water. And I'm not exaggerating. They knew, and they lied to look good. Hold that thought, because this is why the poll numbers are showing what they're showing for President Biden. We did what we had to do to look good, spin a spin, tell a story, keep our narrative going, F the truth, F accountability, F transparency, and it's going to come back to bite them. It didn't right then. They got away with it. The media kind of brushed over it. They said no big deal. The government came out and apologized. In fact, we have the apology. We have one of the apologies. Crafty, can we play the clip of the general apologizing when they suddenly realized they made a mistake weeks later after the New York Times and Washington Post exposed it?
I am now convinced that as many as 10 civilians, including up to 7 children, were tragically killed in that strike. Moreover, we now assess that it is unlikely that the vehicle and those who died were associated with ISIS-K or were a direct threat to U.S. forces. I offer my profound condolences to the family and friends of those who were killed. This strike was taken in the earnest belief that it would prevent an imminent threat to our forces and the evacuees at the airport. But it was a mistake, and I offer my sincere apology.
Okay, that just makes me want to throw up right there. Sorry. Even then, he couldn't admit. He said it's unlikely they were connected. It wasn't unlikely they were connected. They weren't connected. The guy worked for a U.S. aid organization. There was no question they weren't connected. The head of the aid organization he works for is furious at their investigation. Like, they still haven't come clean. They're supposed to now compensate the family, members of the family. They're stalling on it. They didn't. It was unlikely. We know they weren't terrorists. We effed up. We knew they weren't terrorists minutes afterward, and we didn't tell you. No, there's none of that. Just our condolences. We had an earnest belief that they were going to do something bad. I don't know if they had an earnest belief earlier. They wanted to find someone and get them. Their hunger to make their case, to do their thing, led them to act inappropriately. I'm not saying they intentionally just targeted a civilian. They thought maybe it was one, and we got to make a win. We got to get a win right now. We need it for public perception. We need to show we're getting the bad guys. Look, this is some credible information. Go for it. Go for it. Ignore any red flags. Do it. Oops. Well, don't tell anyone. Keep it a secret. Oh, the New York Times, Washington Post exposed it. Oh, guys, sorry. Yeah, I guess we did accidentally hit the wrong people. We're sorry. Our bad. The reason this is relevant today is yesterday or today, the John Kirby, the Secretary of Defense spokesperson, the Defense Department spokesperson, came out and said the military is not calling for any additional accountability measures. He said there was not a strong enough case to be made for personal accountability. There's a breakdown in process execution and procedure, not a negligence or poor leadership. So no one's going to be punished. Not a poor leadership? Not poor leadership in the middle of the most disastrous military extraction in U.S. history. You did that? But that alone was poor leadership. No, it's not poor leadership. Not poor leadership that we targeted an innocent family with a drone strike and killed them all in a hurry to get some bad guys that weren't really getting the bad guys. And, oh, by the way, kept it a secret, even though we knew minutes later. That's what bugged me the most. The press's refusal to point out the military knew what they did minutes after they did it. It didn't take them 3 weeks to figure out who they killed. When the New York Times exposed it, they knew right away who they killed. They knew right away they didn't get a terrorist. And the reason it bugs me is also because the same time yesterday when this came out, it was announced that the truck driver in Colorado, I don't know if you remember this, it was a couple years ago, he drove his semi down and it slipped, and he wasn't drunk or anything. He just didn't take the off-ramp, lost control, and he killed 4 people. Yesterday, he got sentenced to 110 years in prison. 110 years. 110 years for an accident. He wasn't drunk. He was driving too fast down a hill, but he wasn't like on some bender. He lost control of his truck. He didn't take the truck off ramp, and he killed 4 people. And when he was sentenced, he said, "It's hard to live with this tragedy. I can't sleep. I'm thinking all the time about the victims. It was a terrible accident. I take full responsibility, but it wasn't intentional." Okay, I'm not saying the guy should get off scot-free, but he gets 110 years. The U.S. military goes and blows up a family in a hurry to get stuff done, shoots a drone strike, hides, lies about it. No one needs to take responsibility. No, there's no need for personal accountability. What happened to, yes, somebody takes personal accountability? At some point up the chain of command, at a certain point, somebody takes responsibility. Do you go to prison if you're in the military for doing that? Not if it wasn't an intentional war crime, but does somebody get fired? Does somebody resign? Does somebody say, I did it, I'm the top of the chain of command, and the people underneath who executed negligently, incorrectly, are being removed? So we may not put them in prison, but they are being discharged. You can't just do that and get away with it. No, our military, no accountability. Our government, no accountability. That's where this is all going. Lack of accountability, lack of transparency. That is exactly why I think the Biden administration and Democrats are in trouble. And I just want to point out the truck driver who killed 4 people in Colorado's name is Rogel Aguirre Medeiros. He's a Latino. Where's the cry that this is racism? Every time like somebody's charged, or Jesse Smollett, that whole thing, like it's a racist move. It's a racist move to do this. It's racist. Isn't this racist? You're charging a Latino truck driver. I'm being facetious. It's not racist. But again, that hypocritical narrative, it's racist when somebody does something who's white to somebody who's of color. And when somebody of color does something, it's racist if they're prosecuted unfairly. Jesse Smollett, made up a hate crime, just got convicted finally for it. And, Beyonce's mother came out and said he shouldn't get treated so harshly. He did the wrong thing, but he should get an easy walk. And by the way, remember the Karen in Central Park who called out the guy with his, who was telling her to put her dog on a leash, the bird watcher. And she said she called the cops and said like it was, a black man was going to attack her. She didn't go to jail. And Beyonce's mom pointed out, why does the white woman walk free? Why do they make everything about this? Like, first of all, that Karen was a mess and horrible, and I have no sympathy for her. In her life, her career was ruined, and good on it, because she did something despicable. This guy bird watching tells her to put her dog on a leash, and she says, "I'm going to call and say a black man's threatening me." It's disgusting, and I'm glad her life got ruined. And no, she probably shouldn't have gone to prison for it. But what Jesse Smollett did was actually worse. He perpetrated a hate crime, said it was a white Trump lover, MAGA people, fermenting the very hate. Hate goes all directions. The very hate he claimed that he was trying to stop, and the media went crazy. This is modern day lynching. This is an example of why it's so bad in America, why white people are so bad. This is the problem all black people face. Don't get me wrong. Lots of black people face racial injustice. Lots of black people face hate crimes. That's real. That part's real. And you want to make it real, and you want to own it, and you want to punish it, and you want to limit it. Don't go make this stuff up. Don't go make it up to advance your career. And if you do, and you get caught, and you continue to lie about it, but you get convicted anyway, unanimously by a jury on all counts but one, don't make excuses for the guy and say he shouldn't pay a price. He should, because the damage he did, way worse. But no, because we're not into accountability. We're not into transparency. We're not into owning our mistakes. Jussie Smollett still denies he did it. And many people think he shouldn't pay a very severe price for it. You know, he lost his career for now. The whole issue of accountability is really a big deal. And I'm going to bring this now back to the whole issue of what's happening in the polls and what's happening with Biden and the midterms. Washington Post, ABC News poll, 51% of registered voters leaning Republican in a generic congressional ballot, 41% leaning for Democrats. Just FYI, the Washington Post, ABC News poll is highly respected. It's not, you can look left or right, it doesn't matter. It's a highly respected poll. And overall, the average of other polls like Real Clear Politics and all show a Republican lead as well. But the Washington Post, ABC News poll has always been kind of a bellwether. 10% lead, biggest since 1981 when they started doing the polling. I mean, Republicans have never had that. Not even during Clinton, when Republicans swept in the midterm elections in 1994. So why? Well, there's a whole lot of reasons. I mean, you know, Crafty just popped up that, you know, looking at Biden's handling of COVID in the economy, according to CNBC, you know, his approval rating, you know, hitting a low of 41%, stabilizing at 41%. That's like Trump level, you know. 46 to 48% disapproval, you know, on COVID for the first time underwater, and 56% disapproving on the economy. Thanks for that graphic, Crafty. I mean, you know, you're seeing it all: the economy, COVID, overall leadership. You know, in the Washington Post ABC News poll, 45% felt Biden had done little or nothing, and 18% thought he'd done not much. Only 8% thought Biden has done a great deal. That's not good when you're the president who's going to come in and right the ship off the ship you felt was sinking from the last guy, who, despite the media's coverage of it, actually, you know, built a pretty strong economy. I'm not saying everything Trump did was good, but built a strong economy, you know, had a year of a pandemic that tanked that economy. But things were, you know, before that were actually growing and moving. And you can hate Trump and hate his policies on a number of things. But Biden came in and said, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to make it better. And it hasn't. The COVID going underwater thing is a big deal. For the first time, people are like, what? And if you look, you can see it. I mean, LA, you know, California is reinstating indoor mask mandates everywhere. About 8 states are doing that. You know, they're going back to indoor mask mandates, vaccinated or unvaccinated. You know, vax mandates are a huge issue for people. But what's the biggest issue is people are realizing that so many people who have been vaccinated are getting COVID. So now it's like you have the vaccine, you still get COVID. Now, granted, you're not going to the hospital, you're not going to die. So it's lessening that. Let's leave out the whole issue of, you know, what they haven't told us about the vaccine. It clearly makes you have a less severe case of COVID. So that's good, but still people are getting it, whether they're vaccinated or not. And now mask mandates are coming back and everybody's scared, and winter's coming, and Omicron, which isn't as deadly but spreads faster. It's like, clearly the vaccine, they're saying get a third booster shot. Maybe that'll work. How about 4, 5, 6, 7? By the way, remember, a vaccine kind of works, right? It's almost like this isn't a vaccine. It's like a temporary like reprieve. Because, you know, typically a vaccine stops something, doesn't just block it for a couple months. Then you got to keep getting another one and it doesn't block the next variant, and so on and so forth. But Biden's numbers are going underwater on COVID. And that was the big thing. He was going to bring normalcy. He was going to deal with the pandemic. He was going to pull us through it. And when they got in office, they're like, we're good. The vaccine's out. We're going to get this out. It's going to be good. They're not stupid. They know Trump couldn't do much with when the pandemic hit and the economy tanked. So we'll be the ones who lift the economy back up. We bring it back up, and, you know, we save the day, and we manage COVID, and we open the doors to a new world. But they're not. And their mismanagement and their terrible messaging and the confusion they've sent, and letting health agencies like NIH and tell doctors what to do. And Dr. Fauci saying one thing and then another and being Mr. Just let me be around celebrities has completely hurt their credibility. So now the public's suddenly going, hey, we don't buy this. We don't buy what you're doing. We don't buy that you have a solution. You're not making it better. And by the way, the economy's tanking. We have hyper inflation. Prices are rising everywhere. Forget about gas prices. Cost of food, cost of, most basic things is skyrocketing up, and people feel that and they're worried and they're going, the economy's bad and COVID's not gone. And now I got to still wear a mask, even though I'm vaccinated. I got to do this and I'm scared and I'm worried all over again. And you've given me mixed messaging. You've been completely lacking transparency and people are going, what are you doing? You are not leading this country. You are abandoning it. I'm being harsh for saying abandoning, but they're basically like, you're not solving my problems. And that's where you get a public reaction, which is 51% of registered voters saying we're leaning toward voting Republican. Apprehensive Fly. Yes, I agree that it's not 100%. Fair point. And I was being a little facetious with it, but that's a fair point. And I stand corrected on that. But my point really on that is that they created a vaccine that's really leaky and not very effective. And instead of admitting that, that's my problem, Apprehensive Fly. I don't expect them to be perfect. I don't expect them to do everything right. I want them to stop lying to me. Stop telling me everything you did isn't what I see. I feel like I'm the biggest gaslighting experiment in my life when it comes to the government. Everything they do isn't what I see. We started with Afghanistan here. Afghanistan was an awesome withdrawal. It was always going to be a little messy. It worked perfect. It's like, no, it was a total disaster. Just admit it. You messed up. You didn't do it right. You screwed up. You ultimately got us out okay. Oh, inflation, prices are rising. Well, it's really nobody's fault, and just learn to live with it. So prices go up. Spend a little less. Live a little more, good for you. Consume less. I mean, it's just, again, no. You are causing it. You are causing the hyperinflation. You are spending tons of money. You keep spending more on these bills that you think will win you votes, and you are causing more inflation. You are not managing it. So when it gets to COVID, Apprehensive Fly, it bothers me. It bothers me because, okay, I'm pausing myself. Quote the Raven, 1880. That is true that they changed, that there's a whole debate. Did they change the definition of a vaccine on the CDC website? In reality, most vaccines create an impermeable thing. You don't get 2 measles vaccines. You don't generally need it because the vaccine completely, prevents you from being infected. And I'm not, Apprehensive Fly, to your comment before saying that the vaccine doesn't have effectiveness. But let's call it what it is. Let's call it something that reduces your likelihood of getting COVID or reduces the severity of the diseases once you do get it, because it doesn't necessarily be appearing to reduce the likelihood. If you look around, most people remember the whole thing, the unvaccinated are all the ones getting COVID. Now they can't say that anymore because it's just as many vaccinated people are getting COVID as unvaccinated. Right? 60% of America is vaccinated, 40% isn't. Numbers who are getting it, just as many vaccinated people are getting it. So again, just be honest. Just be honest about your testing. Be honest about what you didn't test. Be honest that you didn't test pregnant women. Don't tell me it's safe for pregnant women to get a vaccine. Tell me you never tested pregnant women, because you didn't. You started those tests after the vaccine was out, and they take 9 months after that to know. So don't tell me you tested pregnant women. Don't tell me you tested kids. Tell me you didn't test kids. Don't tell me natural immunity doesn't work when you know it does. Admit that it does work and that still you would like to see people get vaccinated, but you're willing to look at the possibility that perhaps they don't need it if they have natural immunity. I mean, again, be honest, be transparent, acknowledge that Pfizer fudged the data. We now know that. The whistleblower showed it, that their numbers weren't stacked up right. Just admit it. Stop lying to me, Apprehensive Fly. That's what I want. Stop telling me things aren't what they seem to be. Don't tell me the border's fine and whatever happened was because of Trump. Trump's long gone. You're the new CEO. You can't keep blaming the old CEO. You got hired to fix the problems. You got a crisis at the border. Stop pretending you don't. You've got a crisis in the economy. Stop saying it's actually really good. COVID is not going away. And the pandemic isn't really a pandemic in the same sense, but you're stuck with that because you can't acknowledge that you could allow COVID to exist and perhaps we'd be okay. Most people aren't getting COVID and dying anymore. Most people who get it have mild symptoms. Healthy people don't go to the hospital with COVID. Healthy vaccinated people definitely aren't going to the hospital. We are okay. We are okay to function even if we are getting COVID. No, more people are getting COVID, even if it's Omicron. It's very bad, even if it's not as bad. Like, stop making the pandemic because you're stuck doubling down on it. Admit where you were wrong, admit the mistakes, and move forward. This is why the Biden administration, this is why dictionary.com isn't the CDC. Fair point. Look, we can argue all you want. I'll go back to the final point. This is not doing what vaccines typically do. You did not get multiple polio shots. They are basically realizing the vaccine isn't very effective, and to the degree it is effective, they need to keep giving it to you and hoping it will deal with the new variants. And that's the problem. Tell people the truth. Stop lying to them. Stop telling them wearing masks in these settings makes a difference. Masks have a vital function. I interviewed a leading mask person from UCSF, Dr. Gandhi. She's all over the CDC's websites and the AMA, she's a part of the Biden COVID, summit. She's one of the earliest researchers on masking and how valuable it was, and she's hyper pro-vax. She told me we are now living in the politics of masking. It's no longer scientific. People are just wearing masks to wear them. Like, there are places and settings and times where it makes sense and places where it doesn't. Masking fully vaccinated people indoors everywhere is not scientifically proven to help them not get COVID. Wearing your mask outdoors on your bike is certainly not stopping you. So again, honest clarity, we don't have it. And that to me is something, and this comes to the thing when you say, people used to make the argument, I would too, because I'm big on fairness. Oh, hey, you know what? Imagine if Donald Trump was president. Can you imagine if Donald Trump was president, they'd done the drone strike and killed all those people? Do you imagine if Trump was still president, the pandemic was doing all this? They'd be like, see, he's totally incompetent. The economy was tanking and inflation, and he was saying everything's fine, and the border was surging. They'd be like, he's a complete incompetent idiot. Get him out. But with Biden, so much of the media and the Biden administration and the Dems are like, no, it's all good. It's all good. Just look over here. Don't look at the shiny object. Don't look at the shiny object. Don't look at what's really going on. They know. Luke 33, what about the fact that hospitals are too crowded? So that's a relative thing, right? And I caution with it. Some hospitals are dealing with overcrowding. Nothing like the pandemic a year ago. And some of that data is kind of getting distorted. And again, I'm all for data and all for scientific data. But when you look at the numbers, there are a few places where you have overcrowding of hospitals. None are in the condition they were in a year ago. We're not in the same level of the pandemic at all. And at some level, we've become pandemic addicted. So again, I'm not dismissing that some people are going to hospitals, including unvaccinated people who are unhealthy, especially, and should go. I'm merely pointing out there's two sides to it, Luke 33. That's all I'm saying, Luke 33. That's all I'm saying. There are two sides, and we're only allowed to see one. And one is the misinformation, depending on who decides what information is, which is frightfully scary if you think about it, to let anybody decide what misinformation is other than you. Because there's tons of information. You should be able to hear it all and make your own decisions, not be told certain pieces of it are by definition misinformation that you cannot be allowed to hear or speak. I mean, that's thought censorship at its best and worst at the same time. So my point is merely, sure, acknowledge where we have hospital overcrowding. How about we acknowledge that most of the people who have severe consequences from COVID have not just immunocompromised, but are obese? And then one of the best things we could do is tell people to start eating healthier and lose weight and stay healthy. Get outside, get fresh air, exercise. Why don't we acknowledge those things? Why don't we acknowledge that most healthy young people get COVID and are fine? Why won't we let doctors who I've talked to at prominent hospitals who won't go on the record and say it for fear of being fired come out and say natural herd immunity will happen because of a healthy young population, and that's a good thing? They can't say it. They're not allowed. They will be fired. Their careers will be ruined. That is not good. Why can't we have an honest conversation about vaccinating kids and recognize that kids have a almost negligent 0.00001 chance of dying from COVID? They tend to recover quickly. They have strong immune systems. They don't need to be vaccinated. And there are risks with the vaccine. No, most kids aren't going to suffer from the vaccine, but a certain population will, and we don't know long-term effects, and we certainly don't know effects on reproductive systems because they haven't been tested. So why are you going to force kids to get vaccinated instead of acknowledging that most kids will be fine? More kids die of the flu. More kids have died from car accidents. Like, your kids will be fine. No, we can't have an honest conversation, and that's what bothers me. So I think Leroy the Goy, I hesitate on super conspiracy theories. I do think hospitals got funding for doing that. I do think hospitals, look, I've talked to people, in hospitals, like, you code everything to get the maximum insurance benefit. So if you were really dying of cancer, but you happen to get COVID, we're going to mark that as a COVID death too. When cancer was going to kill you, I don't know, COVID accelerated a couple of weeks, like that kind of thing. We have multiple things, and COVID was one of them, right? Checking all the boxes to get it. I don't think, Leroy the Goy, that it is fair to say the first strain wasn't dangerous. And I base that on having interviewed, again, a lot of the doctors that are deemed as the misinformation doctors, the ones that get banned and shut down on Twitter and Facebook for lying and telling, horrible mistruths, from Dr. Robert Malone, who architected the mRNA vaccine, but he is not allowed to tell you the mRNA technology on which the vaccines are built, that he sees real problems in it, even though he knows more about mRNA than 99.99% of the people on the planet and the 99% of the people who are involved in it. He has an opinion that's considered misinformation because it isn't the right one. Dr. Pierre Kory, who's one of the before the pandemic, leading pulmonary critical care specialists, and COVID is a pulmonary disease, again, like, banned for saying things about early treatment, but before this, he was, lauded. His textbook was given the, British Medical Association Textbook of the Year award. But the reason I say to your comment about it not being serious, Dr. Kory said he's an intensive care guy. He was in the hospitals in New York during, he said, I've never seen, this is the guy, by the way, who's banned for misinformation for saying early treatment works. He said, I've never seen a more wicked disease. I've never seen a disease that does more deadly, acts more twisted in a deadly way on the human body. So no, I think COVID was severe and deadly. And the seeking of vaccine was a natural response. And they hurried and they rushed. And that too was natural, and mistakes were made. But now everybody doubles down on it. Instead of saying, maybe we got some things wrong. Maybe masking didn't work the way we thought. Maybe we don't have to be political about it just because Trump said this. We now have to say the other. You say Trump isn't the thing, but Trump's the whole thing. Go on CNN's website today. The first 8 articles are all about Trump and January 6th. I'm like, can you move on to the next real world we're in? No, they're obsessed. They just can't let him go. I know it's good for ratings too, but quote the Raven. Yes, obviously, I'm in Puerto Rico, where they destroyed a perfectly beautiful natural economy with some of the best land for producing agriculture in the world and turned it into a sugar-rich diet. I mean, I get it. They poison people with sugar and carbs. But it's not so much that I want to stress healthy eating. I want them to acknowledge that that's a big part of it. So acknowledge the difference between the healthy and the unhealthy. Acknowledge the difference between different types of people, different groups of people, even different races of people, and how COVID affects them. Acknowledge the difference in age groups. Acknowledge that kids are fine, old people aren't, I had a friend who's a very well-known and successful, pediatric ER doctor, won't go on the record and say it, but was one of the twisted but good things about this disease is that it went after old people, not young people. Acknowledge the truth. That's all I'm asking for. And the failure to acknowledge the truth, the failure to be honest, the failure to tell the truth and be transparent is why those numbers are what they are. Because my belief is you can rail on the media. You can be mad. I've done it. You can be mad at the double standard. Anyone who knows me knows I'm all about be fair. So I get worked up when people aren't fair. But the truth is you don't need to. You don't need to worry about it. People's gut instincts, people's natural instinct to think through what is true slowly permeates through, not for everybody, but for many. And people look around and go, something about this doesn't add up. I kind of got sold a bill of goods. Biden's going to come in and make things right. He didn't. In fact, he's making things worse. And he's not much of a leader, no matter how much you want to pretend he is. No matter how much you want to prop Kamala Harris up as the vice president and say, she's really great, and do another puff piece on her. She's not. She's a lightweight. She always was. And that's not sexist or racist. It's a fact. There are plenty of heavyweight black women leaders out there, and Latino women leaders, and women leaders in general. Kamala Harris isn't one of them. She's a lightweight. And that's why she can't rise to the occasion on any single issue and be a heavyweight. Joe Biden is a featherweight. He never was much of a leader. He never was able to, yes, he was good at kind of negotiating the divide when there was differences, but he's not set to lead. And he's old and tired. And that's a reality too. He's lost multiple steps. Physically, now we know that, they've acknowledged it, and cognitively. I'm not saying he's like off the rails, but he's slow and he's not good at it. And he's super defensive and brittle, just like Trump, without the Trump oomph. And it's hurting us and it's hurting the country, and the failure to just acknowledge these things. Maybe go ahead and acknowledge it. The guy's slow and old and kind of passive and can't read off a teleprompter and can't be allowed to talk to reporters and has to like use his list and say who he's been allowed to talk to. But you know what? Say maybe you'd rather have that, because maybe you'd rather a bumbling idiot in charge. Okay, I wouldn't. I'd rather not have a bumbling idiot, but stop pretending he's not a bumbling idiot, because the more you do that, the more it just becomes apparent that he is. It's like the emperor has no clothes. Like, you got to go back to the kids' stories. You can all watch the emperor march down the street with no clothes and be like, look how great the emperor looks. It's like, that's the media and a lot of the public. But the kids going, the emperor has no clothes, folks. I mean, it's sort of obvious. And at a certain level, more and more voters go, the emperor has no clothes. And the emperor isn't benefited. He'd be better off to be like, yeah, I got no clothes on. Owning it, I'm streaking here, guys. Own that. Biden would actually help himself. The Democrats would help themselves if they could own it. But neither party's good at owning anything. By the way, this is not a treatise on behalf of the Republicans. They're horrible at owning stuff too. They couldn't do it with Trump. Like, both parties so bankrupt, so defunct, so out of date, so useless and tired. I'm sad that 51% want to vote Republican compared to 41% Dem, because I want 80% to want to vote for neither. We have two political parties that are one political establishment that's corrupt and pretends to have difference, pretends to value different things, when they ultimately value the same old, tired, broken process, the same old values, which are short-term, which focus on their immediate gains, advancing more seats in their party. And they switch places, they switch views, they switch positions. One points a finger on one thing when it's on them, the other points the finger the other way when it's on them. They're all hypocritical. And we continue to vote for not the lesser of two evils. We vote for both of the two evils and divide our votes up. They're both evil. They're both bad. We need to stop voting for them. We need an independent movement of voters who want to vote independent candidates in, who don't represent either of these tired, corrupt political establishments. Quote the Raven. We're going to back up to COVID for a second. Yeah, well, monoclonal antibodies help a lot, right? Vitamin D, C, and zinc also, yes, and ivermectin. And again, the whole ivermectin debate where the media made it out to be horse medicine, which it is in a form. But as I've said before, ivermectin used in horses, as is aspirin used in horses. Many human treatments are used in animals in a form designed for animals and a dosage designed for animals. But, ivermectin was a great example. One of the most widely used drugs on the planet, used to treat parasitics across the globe, perfectly safe in humans, one of the lowest risk rates of any drug. But yet you got bashed for using it for COVID. Now, does it work? Doesn't it work? Time will tell. Many studies say it does. But what does it matter? It's not hurting people. Maybe it's helping them. And it's an approved drug. And the reason ivermectin was not allowed to be used is not because they thought it was going to hurt people, partly because Trump said it worked, but largely because ivermectin is a repurposed drug, which means its use is no longer on patent. A pharmaceutical company makes no money from the sale of an off-patent repurposed drug. Once it's not being used for what the patent was for, once it's gone off-market, repurposed, there is no money coming back to the maker of that drug. And if you think I'm stretching it, I'm not. It's a pure economics. Pfizer and Moderna make no money. The makers, the people who created that make no money. There's no financial benefit in having a repurposed drug out there. And repurposed drugs have gotten dissed over and over again like this because there is no financial benefit to pharma. And if you think this isn't about finance or benefit to pharma, then how come pharma got the deal they got? How come it's going to take, 100 years, and I'm not exaggerating, before they'll release all the data on the studies. How come they got to pick their own people and teams to do the testing when the WHO and the European Health Organization all called for it to be open source so there could be more solutions, more people could see it, more people could be involved, more possible remedies and treatments and vaccines could be developed with open source testing outside the control of the companies? Why did they get a liability pass, and why did they get to keep their patents? And why do you think they keep saying 3, 4, 5, 6, 20 shots will be good? Because it's going to be $1 trillion industry for them. And if you think this isn't about money for them, go study the history. Study the last 60 years of pharmaceutical companies. It's all about money for them. 100%. Curious. Ivermectin is for parasites, so that's where I'm lost. Okay, my point is, repurposed drugs are always repurposed for a thing they were not originally designed for. So there'd be a drug that was designed for one activity, and it gets used, say, to prevent strokes. They found it was effective in treating diabetes. You certainly find that with like antidepressants, right? They may have, and then they find, they might be useful for treating Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease. You will repurpose a drug because they find other benefits, uses of it. So the fact that it was originally used for parasites doesn't mean it can't solve other things. They find similar paths in the body. A virus has a parasitic effect, and they found ivermectin. And you'll see, time's going to show. 5 years from now, you'll see all the studies that were done. They were small studies. And I'll finish on this. You go, why wasn't there a big study, a big double-blind massive study? Because big double-blind massive studies take a lot of time, cost a lot of money, and who funds them? Pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceutical companies don't want to fund a giant, massive double-blind study for a drug that has no benefit financially. The many small clinical studies found ivermectin seemed to be effective in treating COVID. And that, again, goes back to the financial incentive. And by the way, the vaccine that Pfizer developed wasn't done with a double-blind study. They supposedly did it with a double-blind study, and they screwed up. The data's there. Go see it. The whistleblower that came out and sort of put all the data out there. The double-blind study wasn't really double-blind, so people could see through. The one's placebo, one's not. The study was flawed. The data was screwed up. I'm not saying it was intentional. It was an error. So even that data is not accurate. So again, time will tell. All of this time will tell. But yes, quote the Raven, over 1 billion times, safest safety profile of any drug ever. So again, who cares if it's working or not? Let people try. Let doctors try. It's certainly not hurting, is my point. So why are you going to go after it? Can't we just be transparent? Okay. My rant is through. It's time for me to bring Crafty on, because Crafty's in lumberjack mode. Crafty. Oh, Crafty.
Yeah.
Come on, hold on. We got to do 2 minutes. I missed the highlight of the fun part of the show because I was so worked up. We got to show Elon Musk and Elizabeth Warren, because this one just cracked me up. So Elizabeth Warren goes after Elon Musk for not paying taxes, and Crafty pulled together the whole thread. I don't know if it starts Crafty. Does it start with her? Yeah, she says, let's change the rig tax code. So the person of the year, because that was Elon Musk, will actually pay taxes and stop freeloading off everyone else. What I love is when you go after Elon Musk, he comes after you like with a sledgehammer. So he says, you remind me of when I was a kid. My friend's angry mom would just randomly yell at everyone for no reason. He called her a Karen, and he says, please don't call the manager on me, Senator Karen. And the thread went on. And he said, thanks, Crafty. He said, if anybody bothered to look, they would see that this year I will pay more taxes than any human being ever. Be right. Now, I'm not saying he pays enough, but because he's so rich, he's going to pay more taxes than anyone's ever paid. And I just think it was funny. Yes, Tommy Falah Earl, we need an independent party. But more than that, we need an independent movement, Tommy, because we need an independent movement, not just a party, because a party will get stuck. We need a literal movement of citizens running on a simple, like systemic, like 3 simple points, like not detailed policy, 3 simple principles. Maybe it's, term limits. I have to think about them. Excuse me. 3 systemic principles. Like one could be term limits. One could be, wow, my brain's stuck on it. I've thought about this so many times. They can't be policies. It can't be gun control. Can't be abortion. Can't be higher taxes. It could be a tax thing because that's financial. It could be we're going to have a constitutional convention and we're going to make the Constitution reflect the times we're in, adapt, modify. Could be broad principles. I will refuse to work with either party. I will only work with the movement of independence. I mean, the idea being an actual independent movement could be based on total transparency. I'll make all my work transparent. I will not work with lobbyists. Any number of ways you create an independent movement that then runs a mass election to get all 535 members of the U.S. Congress, House and Senate removed in one single election. It won't work with the Senate because you have cycles in the 6 years, but you get most of them and get the rest of the senators in the next round. And I call it the national enema. Just clean it out, baby. The world's biggest, America's biggest colonoscopy. That's what it's called, right? Enema, national enema. That's what I want. Crafty, what do you think? National enema time? You ready? You signing up for the enema?
Yeah, it's time. We've talked about it enough, and it's time for a change. It's time for a change.
Will you take the enema, Crafty? Will you join the national enema? Come on, can you see the marketing?
You know what?
I'm not marketing.
I'm not afraid. I'll be the first one.
You will?
Yeah.
You'll be like, I will do the national enema.
Because if no one sets that example, then no one's going to follow.
Yeah.
I'm not used to following. I usually, beat to my own drum. So
right.
Yes, I'm not afraid. I'll be the first one.
Could we do a TikTok challenge out of that? Like you do the enema? Do the enema.
Yeah, technically you could. Yeah.
Do the enema. What do people have, a hose? Do you have a hose? You just hold the hose, do the enema. I'm into the enema. It doesn't work. All right, Crafty, Lumberjack Crafty, your takeaway thought, question, idea, challenge to me and our audience.
So you and I talked about it. You and I talked about it on the last show after we went off of air. And the question was, we saw for years how much the media was behind like the Democrats. But like that changed, and like we saw it aggressively like in the last 4 or 6 weeks, right? Where CNN is like blasting Kamala Harris and Biden. We didn't normally see that. What changed? Like the relationship between the media and the Dems and the left? Why is that now not as symbiotic as it once was?
So, look, I think it's probably less about anything conscious and more the fact that the media, that symbiotic relationship was built on getting rid of Trump and building something different. And there is a similar narrative. And certainly the Biden White House is in there telling, the White House what they'd like their messaging to be. They're not controlling it, but telling the news outlets what they'd like to go with. But I think part of it is that at a certain point, the media just realized you can only cover so long for something that's not true. I mean, it's just, it's just hard, like at a certain point, how long can you keep spinning? But to be honest, Crafty, I'm going to give you a simpler answer. I think it's about money again. I think they're seeing their ratings aren't doing well and people are starting to distrust them and they're losing their credibility. Hey, I want to just say, curious conclusion. Yes, independent voting, good for you. We need more. I want to back up for a second, Crafty. Apprehensive Fly said I'm discussing conspiracy theories and I should put the tinfoil hat down. And I just want to say to that, I don't know what specifically he thought Apprehensive Fly thinks my conspiracy theory was. But if you think of the conspiracy theory is that pharmaceutical companies don't want to run, I don't know if that's what it is, don't want to make money, depress the attempt to get drugs out there. You, my friend, I'm not a conspiracy theorist in that. That's just like, go do the homework, do the research. Like it's been written about. The left used to hate pharma for this very reason. Big pharma has never been out there for the American public. I'm not saying it's bad. We need drugs. We need drug development. There's an entire argument, though, Apprehensive Fly, for that we could do drug development in a way that creates more transparency, still allows drug companies to profit extensively, but forces more transparency, openness, and creates more public benefit without actually preventing them. They don't get a license to just go do whatever and make all the money in the world. And this is a perfect example. But I will take the challenge on Apprehensive Fly, anytime. I am not a conspiracy theorist, although I do believe just because you post something that sounds conspiratorial doesn't mean it's not true. I always like to say the Kennedy assassination. You are a conspiracy theorist for saying Kennedy was assassinated by more than one person. Everybody now knows it's true. Study after study, the U.S. Senate's inquiry into it. I've talked to numerous members of the Kennedy family. They're like, we all know it was true. I went to school and had a professor who's now passed away, John Ely at Stanford Law School, who was the clerk for Chief Justice Warren on the Warren Commission that did the thing. And I asked him, why did they conclude what they concluded? And instead of defending it, he said, we said what we had to say to keep the country calm. But that was a massive conspiracy. So just because you're saying something that seems like it involves a lot of twist and entanglement doesn't mean it's not true. And I'm actually not off the charts conspiracy crazy. I generally go, no. But certain things, you got to open your eyes and think about.
Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Exactly. And just because it's a conspiracy doesn't mean it's not true. And I don't, Crafty knows. Crafty's way more of a conspiracy theorist than I am. And I'm always saying, Crafty, you're making that stuff up. He's like, the White House is getting told what to say or telling the media what to say, and they say it. And I'm like, no, they're getting told what they want them to say, and they're choosing to say it. Nobody's like pulling the strings and making CNN publish stuff.
Well, that we specifically were talking about that regarding one of the Timcast videos that if you guys watch Timcast on YouTube. So
right.
It came out saying that the Biden administration is talking to the media, certain channel outlets about what to talk about and how to talk about it.
Yeah, but I'm not saying they're not making them say it. Okay, we have to end on this thing here, Apprehensive Fly. I didn't say losing weight is the solution to prevent COVID. I said being healthy. This is, again, Apprehensive Fly. Like, I feel like you're not willing to look at the science or the data. Ivermectin has been proven to reduce COVID. There are numerous studies, just not giant double-blind studies, but many drugs are tested in smaller peer-reviewed studies. There are many studies suggesting a positive benefit from ivermectin, numerous. When you say 0% of scientists back that theory up, you are only reading the information that certain outlets are letting you read. There are numerous scientists, well-known scientists, well-known doctors. I will go back to Dr. Pierre Kory. Dr. Pierre Kory is, before the pandemic, one of the top pulmonary intensive care specialists in the world. His textbook is the most widely read textbook in medical schools across the world. He won the British Medical Association President's Award. COVID is a pulmonary disease. Dr. Pierre Kory is one of the leading experts in an area that COVID is the disease of, pulmonary. Dr. Harvey Reich is one of the leading epidemiologists in the world at Yale University. They both believe ivermectin works. So don't say 0% of scientists or 0% of doctors. Many doctors, many scientists, and many studies show it works. How much, how effective, time will show. There's zero evidence that it hurts you. But when you say 0% of scientists in that, you're now just buying one narrative message, because it's not hard to do the research to find that there are numerous studies and numerous reports and numerous peer-reviewed studies and studies that got blocked when they were doing it because the medical journals refused to publish them, and much data. I'm not saying it's all or nothing, but to go to the zero mode or suggest that that's just made up, you're the one drinking the Kool-Aid and that, not me. I'm wide-eyed about it, going, it may not work as well as they say it might. It certainly doesn't hurt you. And the minute you go on a rampage in the media to tell me it's horse medicine, people are taking horse dewormer, stop. They're not. They're taking a doctor-prescribed dose of a widely prescribed drug that may be having some positive effect. And there's countless stories. So again, I know a doctor who's treated 6,000 COVID patients. It's the most in the world or the U.S. for any doctor to treat. And he gives them ivermectin and they see the results, vaccinated and unvaccinated. It's part of a protocol. I'm not saying it's 100%, but let's just allow ourselves to have fluidity in the conversation and look at all sides and try all different things. That's all I'm advocating for. Okay, we're going to wrap. Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene. My Apprehensive Fly is getting a lot of airtime. I will wrap on this. I can tell you my thoughts on them. I think they're very extreme. I think they're like AOC of the right. They play to the media. They play to their base. I don't think what they're saying is generally constructive. I don't think what they say half the time is very accurate. They're playing to a hardcore base. And to me, that's just as much a part of the problem. Now, sometimes they say things that I think need to get said, and they push the principle of an argument, as does AOC. But in both cases, it's more part of the same party rivalry, stir up the extreme fringes of the base, which I think there's a little base here and a little base here and a vast number of people here going, can you just stop and focus on fixing the problems in this country, work together, get solutions, stop pushing us apart, stop making everything a division when it doesn't have to be, and find some common ground and solve things. And that's thus the case, the need for an independent political movement, which Crafty is going to lead with his enema stick. Right, Crafty? It's Rob Nelson Live. Thanks for watching.